I never thought a simple yard sale would turn my life upside down. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and what happened to me last October still gives me nightmares. It was a drizzly Saturday morning in Millfield, Oregon. The kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside, but I had been hunting for vintage cameras for months. Photography was my hobby, and I loved collecting older models to restore and use for my personal projects. I was driving my 2017 Honda Civic through the suburban neighborhoods when I spotted a sign for an estate sale on Cedar Lane. The house was a modest two-story with a wraparound porch, typical of the area. Rain droplets clung to my windshield as I parked behind a white Ford Explorer. The sale was being run by an older woman in her 70s, Eleanor Patterson, who explained that her son had recently passed away and she was clearing out his belongings. She seemed eager to get rid of everything quickly, pricing items well below their value. That's when I saw it, a beautiful 1970s Pentax K1000 sitting in a cardboard box with some photography equipment. The camera body looked pristine, and the asking price was only $30. For a camera worth easily 10 times that amount, it was an incredible deal. My son David was quite the photographer, Eleanor said when she noticed my interest. He had his own darkroom in the basement. Always said he was working on some big project, but I never knew what. I purchased the camera along with several rolls of what appeared to be exposed film that came with it. Eleanor seemed relieved to have someone who appreciated photography take David's equipment. Back home, I spent the afternoon cleaning and inspecting my new camera. Everything functioned perfectly. The real surprise came when I decided to develop the film rolls that evening in my makeshift darkroom, really just my bathroom with blackout curtains and a red light. The first roll contained standard landscape shots around Millfield. Nothing unusual. The second roll had some portrait work, professional-looking headshots of various people I didn't recognize. David Patterson had clearly been skilled at his craft. But the third roll made my blood run cold. The first few images showed the exterior of my apartment building on Maple Avenue. Clear, detailed shots taken from different angles and at different times of day. I recognized my silver Honda Civic in several of the photos, parked in my usual spot. My hands shook as I continued examining the developed photos under the red light. The next series showed me leaving my apartment building, walking to my car, entering the local grocery store, sitting at my favorite coffee shop on First Avenue. Someone had been following me, documenting my daily routine. The final photos in the series were the most disturbing. They were taken through my bedroom window from the apartment building across the street. The angle was perfect. Whoever took these had found the exact spot to capture my private moments. Photos of me sleeping, changing clothes, working on my laptop. I immediately called the Millfield Police Department. Officer James Richardson arrived within 20 minutes, a tall man in his 40s who took detailed notes, as I explained the situation. "Ma'am, I need to ask, did you know David Patterson personally? Had you ever noticed anyone following you before today?" I shook my head. The name meant nothing to me, and I had never felt like I was being watched. But looking at these photos, it was clear this surveillance had been going on for weeks, maybe months. Officer Richardson bagged the photos as evidence and took a statement. He explained that since David Patterson was deceased, there might not be much they could do criminally, but they would investigate to see if he had targeted other women. "Mrs. Patterson seemed like such a sweet old lady," I told him. "Do you think she knew?" "Hard to say. Sometimes family members are completely unaware of this kind of behavior. We'll need to interview her." The next few days were hell. I couldn't sleep, constantly checking my windows and feeling like I was being watched. I installed additional locks and blackout curtains, but the damage to my sense of security was done. Then Officer Richardson called with an update that made everything worse. "Ms. Martinez, we searched David Patterson's basement darkroom. We found over 2,000 photographs of different women around town. You weren't his only target. We've identified at least 15 other victims so far." My stomach dropped. 15? The photos go back several years. We think he had been stalking women systematically, documenting their routines, learning their schedules. We found detailed notebooks with personal information, where they worked, shopped, exercised. He paused before delivering the most chilling news. We also found evidence that he had been inside some of these women's homes. Spare keys, security codes, personal items that had gone missing. I thought about all the times I had wondered where I'd left my earrings, or couldn't find a particular shirt. Things I'd assumed I had simply misplaced. The estate sale. I whispered. His mother was selling everything. What if other people bought cameras or equipment with photos of their victims? Officer Richardson confirmed my worst fear. We're tracking down everyone who attended the sale. You may have saved other women from discovering what you did. If you hadn't developed that film. Eleanor Patterson was devastated when police informed her about her son's activities. She had genuinely believed David was simply a nature photographer working on legitimate projects. The basement darkroom had been off-limits to her, which David had explained as necessary for protecting his sensitive film development process. The investigation revealed that David had been escalating his behavior over time. Police found evidence suggesting he had been planning to move from surveillance to direct contact with his victims. Notes in his handwriting described detailed plans for approaching several women, including myself. His sudden death from a heart attack may have prevented something far worse from happening. Police recovered cameras and equipment sold to 6 other buyers at the estate's sale. 3 contained similar surveillance photos of different women around Millfield. The buyers, all innocent photography enthusiasts like myself, were horrified to discover they had unknowingly purchased evidence of stalking. The case made local news, prompting other women to come forward with reports of feeling watched or having small items go missing from their homes. The pattern was always the same. David would study his targets for months, learning their routines and vulnerabilities. I moved to a different apartment across town, but the psychological impact lingered. Every camera I see now reminds me of those developed photos. The hobby I once loved became associated with violation and fear. The strangest part was the timing. If I hadn't decided to go yard sale hunting that particular rainy Saturday, if Eleanor Patterson had thrown away David's photography equipment instead of selling it, his crimes might never have been discovered. Sometimes I wonder how many other David Pattersons are out there, hiding behind seemingly innocent hobbies, documenting the lives of unsuspecting women. How many estate sales or garage sales have unwittingly sold evidence of crimes that were never reported? The Millfield Police Department used this case to launch a community awareness program about stalking and surveillance. They encourage people who buy used cameras or electronics to check for existing content before use. As for Eleanor Patterson, she donated the proceeds from the estate sale to a local women's shelter. She still sends me a card every few months, apologizing for what her son put me through, even though none of it was her fault. I eventually returned to photography, but I've never looked at a camera the same way. Every click of the shutter reminds me that somewhere, someone might be using this same technology to violate another person's privacy and sense of security. The rain still makes me nervous too, knowing that David used overcast days as cover for his surveillance activities. Weather that once felt cozy and peaceful now reminds me of how vulnerable we all are to people who watch from the shadows. Have you ever bought something at a yard sale or estate sale that revealed more than you bargained for? Do you think we really know what we're bringing into our homes when we purchase used items from strangers? I'm Patricia Chin, a registered nurse at Riverside Medical Center, and what I witnessed at a yard sale in Clearwater, Washington last November still haunts me professionally. It was a foggy Saturday morning when I spotted the signs along Oak Street. What caught my attention wasn't the sale itself, but the crowd gathered outside a ranch-style house on Birch Way. Cars lined the street, a red Toyota Camry, blue Chevrolet Malibu, several others, but nobody was approaching the tables of merchandise. The homeowner, Frank Morrison, stood on his front porch wearing a yellow hazmat suit. Not a Halloween costume, an actual industrial-grade protective suit complete with respirator mask and rubber gloves. Hand-painted signs were posted everywhere. Free everything must go. And, do not touch without protection. I parked my 2019 Nissan Altima and approached cautiously. My medical training kicked in immediately. If there was legitimate contamination, people needed to be warned and authorities contacted. "Sir, I'm a nurse," I called out. "What type of contamination are we dealing with?" Frank's voice was muffled through his respirator. "Gamma radiation. Cesium-137. Everything in this house is hot. I've been exposed for months without knowing." The crowd murmured nervously. I noticed several people backing toward their vehicles. "When was the contamination detected?" I asked. "Have you contacted the Department of Health?" Frank gestured wildly at the items covering his lawn furniture, electronics, clothing, kitchen appliances. 3 weeks ago. Geiger counter went crazy. The readings are off the charts. Something didn't add up. I'd worked with radioactive materials during my nuclear medicine rotation. Legitimate contamination would trigger immediate emergency response protocols. No health department would allow a civilian to handle radioactive materials alone. "Can I see the readings?" I requested. Frank disappeared inside and returned with a yellow plastic device that looked like a toy from an electronics store. The digital display showed random numbers that changed constantly. My heart sank. I recognized the device, a novelty, radiation detector, sold online for $30. Not a real Geiger counter. "Mr. Morrison, this isn't a functioning radiation detector," I said gently. "These are decorative items that display random numbers." His response was immediate and hostile. "You're one of them. The government sent you to cover this up." The situation escalated quickly. Frank began shouting about conspiracies and cover-ups, claiming nuclear waste had been secretly buried in residential areas. His paranoia was textbook classic signs of a psychiatric episode. What made it worse was that people were actually taking items. Despite the supposed radiation danger, bargain hunters couldn't resist free merchandise. I watched a young mother load children's toys into her Honda Pilot, while Frank screamed warnings about contamination. "Ma'am, please don't take those," I told her. "Not because of radiation, but because this man is having a mental health crisis. These items may not be legally his to give away." She looked confused. "But he's giving everything away free. My kids need toys." The scene became more chaotic as word spread through social media. Cars kept arriving: a white Ford F-150, silver Hyundai Sonata, burgundy Jeep Grand Cherokee. People were loading furniture, electronics, and household items while Frank continued his hazmat-suited warnings. I called 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Within minutes, Officer Sarah Thompson arrived in a marked Clearwater Police Ford Explorer, followed by 2 paramedics in a Riverside medical ambulance. "Sir, I need you to remove the protective equipment and speak with us," Officer Thompson said firmly. Frank refused, claiming removal would expose him to lethal radiation levels. The paramedics, colleagues of mine from the hospital, recognized signs of acute psychological distress. "Frank, I'm EMT Rodriguez. We're here to help. There's no radiation danger, but we're concerned about your well-being." What happened next broke my heart. Frank collapsed in his driveway, sobbing uncontrollably. Through his tears, he explained that his wife had died of cancer 8 months earlier. He'd convinced himself that their home was contaminated and had caused her illness. The radiation detector had been purchased online after weeks of obsessive research about environmental causes of cancer. Frank had been living in terror for 3 weeks, wearing protective equipment constantly, unable to sleep or eat properly. Meanwhile, the crowd had cleared out most of his belongings. Thousands of dollars worth of furniture, electronics, and personal items were gone. Items that weren't Frank's alone to give away; they were marital property, family heirlooms, things with sentimental value. Officer Thompson began the process of getting Frank psychiatric help while trying to document what had been taken. The challenge was that most people had driven away without identification, and Frank had been giving everything away without keeping records. "This is essentially theft," Officer Thompson explained to me privately. "People took advantage of someone in psychological crisis. But proving it legally will be nearly impossible." Frank was transported to our hospital for psychiatric evaluation. I followed up on his case during my next shift. He was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety, complicated by grief and guilt over his wife's death. The psychiatrist, Dr. Williams, explained that Frank's radiation paranoia was a manifestation of his need to find an external cause for his wife's cancer. He couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things happen without explanation. Creating a contamination scenario gave him something concrete to blame and fight. Recovery was slow. Frank's family, his adult daughter came from Portland, were horrified to learn about the yard sale. Generations of family possessions were gone, including his late wife's jewelry and photo albums. People just took everything. His daughter Michelle told me when I visited Frank during his hospital stay. Wedding photos, mom's china, furniture that belonged to my grandparents. They saw a man in obvious distress and took advantage. Some items were recovered. Officer Thompson posted on local social media groups, explaining the situation and asking people to return items. About 30% came back, mostly larger furniture pieces that people felt guilty keeping. But the damage was extensive. Frank lost approximately $15,000 worth of belongings, including irreplaceable family heirlooms and his wife's personal effects. The case highlighted something disturbing about human nature. When people see free items, moral considerations often disappear. The hazmat suit and radiation warnings should have been red flags that something was seriously wrong, but the promise of free merchandise overrode common sense. Frank eventually recovered with proper psychiatric treatment and medication. He moved to a smaller apartment and started grief counseling. The last I heard, he was volunteering with a local cancer support group, helping other families cope with loss. The incident led to policy discussions at our hospital about community mental health resources. How many people suffer in isolation until their psychological distress manifests in public ways? How many Frank Morrisons are there who don't get help before reaching crisis points? I still drive past that house on Birchway sometimes. New owners live there now, completely unaware of what happened on their front lawn. But I remember Frank in his yellow hazmat suit, desperately trying to protect people from danger that existed only in his grief-stricken mind. The most tragic part was that Frank's instinct to protect others was genuine. Even in his psychological crisis, he was trying to warn people about what he believed was lethal contamination. His generosity, giving away everything free rather than profiting from contaminated items, came from a place of caring, not malice. But people took advantage of his vulnerability instead of recognizing his pain. Have you ever encountered someone having a mental health crisis in public? Do you think people would have acted differently if they had understood Frank's psychological state rather than focusing on free merchandise? I'm Michael Torres, a construction supervisor from Ashford, Montana, and what I discovered at a yard sale last September made me question everything about privacy and personal safety in our digital age. It was a cold, misty morning when I spotted the sale on Willow Court. I'd been looking for tools and equipment for my crew, driving my 2018 Ford F-250 through the residential area after finishing an early morning inspection at our current job site, a new housing development on the outskirts of town. The sale was organized by Janet Hoffman, a woman in her 60s with graying hair and tired eyes. She was clearing out her deceased brother's estate, and the sheer volume of items suggested someone who had lived as a recluse. He was a writer, she explained, gesturing toward multiple boxes of books stacked on folding tables. Self-published mostly. Horror novels. I don't read that stuff myself, gives me nightmares, but maybe someone will want them. The books were priced at 50 cents each, clearly just trying to get rid of them. I wasn't much of a reader myself, but my wife Lisa enjoyed horror stories, especially during the Halloween season. So I grabbed a few titles that caught my eye. Night Terrors, The Watcher, Suburban Nightmares, and The Silent Observer. The covers looked professionally done, featuring dark imagery and the author name, R.M. Steinberg. Your brother had quite a collection, I commented to Janet while paying for the books. Robert was different, she said carefully. Very private. Spent most of his time in that basement office, writing. Said he was documenting human nature, but I never really understood what he meant. That evening, Lisa started reading Night Terrors, while I worked on paperwork in our kitchen, reviewing project timelines and material orders for the following week. About an hour later, she called out from the living room. "Mike, you need to see this." Her voice had a strange, unsettled tone that made me look up immediately from my invoices. She was sitting on our couch, holding the book open, her face pale in the lamplight. "This character has your name. Michael Torres. Construction supervisor. Lives in Ashford." I thought it was an odd coincidence until she read the passage aloud. Michael Torres finished his shift at the Westfield construction site and drove his white Ford pickup truck home to Spruce Circle, where his wife Lisa waited with dinner and updates about their daughter Emma's soccer practice. My blood ran cold. We lived on Spruce Circle. My work truck was white. Emma did play soccer. The details were far too specific to be random. "Keep reading," I said, though part of me didn't want to know what came next. The book described Michael Torres in disturbing, intimate detail. His morning routine of stopping at Corner Cafe on Pine Street for coffee and a breakfast sandwich, always the same order: black coffee and egg sandwich on wheat bread. His habit of listening to classic rock station 103.7 during his 20-minute commute. His Friday night tradition of meeting his crew at Murphy's Bar for drinks and to discuss the week's progress. Every single detail was accurate. Someone had been watching me, studying my patterns, documenting my life with the precision of a private investigator. But it got exponentially worse as Lisa continued reading. The fictional Michael Torres was being stalked by a killer who knew his schedule, his routines, his vulnerabilities. The story described the killer watching from the construction site parking lot, noting which truck Michael drove, what time he arrived and left, who he talked to during breaks. The stalker in the book knew that Michael always parked in the same spot, third row from the site trailer. Knew that he ate lunch alone in his truck while reviewing afternoon schedules. Knew that he stopped at Ashford Hardware every Tuesday to pick up supplies. The level of surveillance detail was terrifying. The fictional killer had mapped out Michael's entire life, identifying the perfect opportunities for an attack. The book described plans to follow Michael home, to wait in the shadows near his garage, to strike when he was most vulnerable. Lisa grabbed the second book. The Watcher. This one featured a character named Dr. Patricia Vance, a pediatrician who worked at Ashford General Hospital. "That's Dr. Vance from Emma's appointments," Lisa whispered, her hands shaking slightly. "Remember? She's treated Emma since she was 5 years old." The book described Dr. Vance's schedule with the same frightening accuracy. Her morning rounds starting at 7:15 a.m., checking on young patients in rooms 312, 318, and 324. Her lunch breaks in the hospital cafeteria, always sitting at the corner table near the windows. The route she took to her silver Honda Accord in the hospital parking garage, level B2, space 47. Again, the story involved a stalker planning violence against the doctor. The fictional predator knew Dr. Vance worked late on Thursdays, knew she often left the hospital alone around 9 p.m., knew she took the same route home through the less populated residential area on Elm Street. I opened Suburban Nightmares and found Tom Bradley, a local accountant I recognized from Emma's school events. The book detailed his daily routine: morning jog at 6 a.m. through Riverside Park, breakfast at Sunrise Diner, arrival at his downtown office by 8:30 a.m. The pattern was becoming clear and absolutely terrifying. Someone had been conducting systematic surveillance on multiple residents of Ashford, documenting their lives in obsessive detail, then weaving them into horror fiction where they became victims of violent stalkers. I called the Ashford Police Department immediately. The dispatcher took the information seriously and promised to send an officer right away. Officer David Kim arrived within 30 minutes, driving a marked white Ford Explorer with light bar flashing. He was a younger officer, maybe early 30s, with a professional demeanor that put me somewhat at ease. "Sir, these aren't just fiction," he said after examining the books for several minutes. "Someone conducted extensive surveillance on real people and wrote them into violent scenarios. This constitutes stalking at minimum, possibly criminal harassment. We need to investigate this immediately. Officer Kim contacted the other people mentioned in the books. Dr. Vance confirmed that her routines were described with disturbing accuracy, details that only someone conducting deliberate surveillance could have known. She was particularly shaken by the description of her parking spot and evening schedule. Tom Bradley was equally horrified to learn his daily schedule was documented in such detail. The book even knew what I ordered for breakfast, he told Officer Kim. Pancakes and coffee, same thing every morning for 3 years. That's not public information. The investigation quickly expanded. Detective Sarah Martinez, a veteran investigator with the Ashford Police Department, took over the case. She obtained a search warrant for Robert Steinberg's residence, which Janet Hoffman had been preparing to sell. What they found in Steinberg's basement office was a stalker's command center. The walls were covered with photographs of dozens of local residents' surveillance shots taken with telephoto lenses from concealed positions. Filing cabinets contained detailed schedules, behavioral patterns, and personal information about his targets. Steinberg had maintained individual folders for each person he surveilled. My folder contained photos spanning 8 months, pictures of me arriving at construction sites, eating lunch in my truck, shopping at the hardware store, attending Emma's soccer games. He had documented my routines with obsessive precision. The psychological profile is deeply disturbing, Detective Martinez explained during a follow-up interview at the police station. Steinberg wasn't just watching people randomly, he was conducting systematic surveillance with clear predatory intent, then fantasizing about violence against them and publishing those fantasies. The investigation revealed that Steinberg had been self-publishing these books online through Amazon's Kindle Direct publishing platform and other digital publishing services. The books had been available for purchase for over 2 years, with sales records showing purchases by readers nationwide who had no idea they were buying stories based on real surveillance victims. More disturbing was the discovery that Steinberg had been escalating his behavior over time. His most recent manuscripts, found on his computer hard drive, contained detailed plans that crossed the line from fiction into what appeared to be actual planning documents for real crimes. We believe his death from a heart attack last month prevented something terrible from happening, Detective Martinez said grimly. The gap between his surveillance activities and his fictional violence was narrowing significantly. His most recent writings suggested he was planning to transition from observer to participant. The computer analysis revealed search histories for weapons purchases, surveillance equipment, and methods for avoiding detection. Steinberg had been researching how to disable home security systems, how to track cell phones, and how to approach victims without leaving evidence. Janet Hoffman was devastated when she learned the full scope of her brother's activities. She'd always found his books disturbing but assumed they were normal horror fiction drawing from imagination rather than real surveillance. Robert always said he wrote what he knew, she told Detective Martinez through tears. He claimed he understood human nature because he studied people carefully. I thought he meant psychology, not literal stalking. I should have paid more attention to the warning signs. The yard sale books were immediately recalled from other buyers who had purchased copies. Most people were relieved to return them once they understood the situation, but several buyers had already started reading and were shocked to discover they might know some of the characters. The legal ramifications were complex. While surveillance and stalking were clearly criminal, fiction based on real people existed in a complicated gray area of privacy law. The victims couldn't sue a deceased author for damages, and removing already published books from online platforms proved nearly impossible due to digital distribution systems. Dr. Vance immediately changed her routines completely and invested in a comprehensive home security system. She also requested a parking spot change at the hospital and began varying her schedule unpredictably. I can't live knowing someone documented my vulnerabilities so thoroughly, she explained. Tom Bradley moved to a different city within 2 months, unwilling to continue living in a place where his daily patterns had been so extensively mapped. Several other people mentioned in the books relocated, took extended leave from work, or dramatically altered their lifestyles. The case raised disturbing questions about digital privacy and surveillance in small communities. How many people are being watched without their knowledge? How many Robert Steinbergs are out there, turning their victims' ordinary lives into entertainment or worse? What made the situation even more unsettling was discovering that the books had received positive online reviews from readers who praised the realistic details and authentic character development. Unknown to these reviewers, they were celebrating the violation of real people's privacy and the documentation of their vulnerabilities. One Amazon review read, "The author really knows how to make characters feel real and relatable. The daily routines and local details make this feel like it could be happening in any small town." Another praised, "The authentic way the author captures small-town life and makes you feel like you really know these people." These readers were unknowingly encouraging and validating surveillance-based fiction, creating a market for books that violated real people's privacy and safety. The Ashford Police Department used this case to develop new protocols for investigating surveillance crimes and digital stalking. They now monitor local self-published authors for suspicious content and maintain awareness of how modern stalking can manifest in unexpected digital formats. They also established a community education program about surveillance awareness, teaching residents to recognize signs that they might be under observation and encouraging reporting of suspicious behavior. I still think about those books and their implications for privacy and safety. Somewhere online, people might still be reading fictional accounts of my daily routine, my family's patterns, and detailed descriptions of my vulnerabilities. The idea that my ordinary life became someone else's horror story without my knowledge or consent continues to be deeply unsettling. We moved to a different neighborhood 6 months later, and I changed construction companies, but the psychological impact remains significant. Every morning when I leave for work, I find myself scanning for unfamiliar vehicles or people who might be watching. I vary my routines now, take different routes, eat at different places. Emma asks why we moved away from her friends and her soccer team. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that someone was watching Daddy, documenting our family's life, and writing stories about hurting people we knew? The most troubling aspect is wondering how many other Robert Steinbergs are operating undetected in communities across the country. How many people are being surveilled, studied, and potentially written into violent fantasies without ever knowing they'd become someone's obsession? Have you ever discovered that someone was watching you or documenting your life without permission? Do you think we're truly aware of how much our predictable daily routines reveal about our vulnerabilities to those who choose to watch and study us from the shadows? I'm Robert Hayes, a retired mechanic from Greenwood, Nevada, and what happened at a yard sale on Sycamore Road last December still makes me question how far people will go for profit. It was a bitter cold morning when I drove my 2016 Chevrolet Silverado to what looked like a massive estate sale. The advertisement promised, "Everything must go unbeatable prices." But when I arrived, something felt wrong immediately. A large man in his 40s, wearing a black leather jacket, stood near the entrance. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, the sale organizer. "Everything's priced to move fast," he said with an aggressive smile. "But fair warning, these deals won't last long." The merchandise was impressive. High-end electronics, antique furniture, jewelry, power tools. Items worth thousands being sold for hundreds. But Marcus wasn't just running a sale, he was running an intimidation operation. When elderly customers hesitated over prices, Marcus would step closer. "Look, these prices are firm. You want it or not? I've got other buyers waiting." His tone was threatening, not sales-friendly. I watched him corner a young mother examining a children's bicycle. "That bike's worth $400 new. I'm asking $75. You think about it too long, it's gone." When she said she needed to check with her husband, Marcus grabbed her arm. "Lady, I don't hold items. Buy it now or walk away." The woman bought the bike, clearly frightened. Marcus used different tactics on different people. With men, he'd get confrontational. "You questioning my prices? These are the best deals you'll see anywhere." With women, he'd invade personal space, making them uncomfortable until they purchased items to escape. When I questioned the legitimacy of some expensive items, Marcus stepped uncomfortably close. You calling me a thief? I inherited this stuff legally. You want something or not? His breath smelled like alcohol and cigarettes. His hands were scarred, suggesting someone accustomed to physical confrontation. I realized this wasn't just aggressive sales tactics, this was criminal intimidation. Other buyers were visibly nervous. An older man purchasing tools kept looking around anxiously. A couple buying furniture seemed eager to leave quickly. Marcus had created an atmosphere of fear, pressuring people into purchases through implied threats. I called 911 from my truck. When Officer Jennifer Walsh arrived in her patrol car, a marked Dodge Charger, Marcus immediately changed his demeanor. Suddenly he was friendly, helpful, explaining how he was just trying to clear out his late uncle's estate quickly. People get confused at sales, he told Officer Walsh. I'm just trying to keep things moving efficiently. But other buyers corroborated my observations. The young mother described how Marcus had grabbed her arm. The elderly tool buyer admitted he'd felt pressured to purchase items he didn't need. Officer Walsh began investigating the merchandise. Several items had suspicious origins: electronics with serial numbers that didn't match retail records, jewelry that appeared to be stolen goods, tools that looked like they'd been recently acquired rather than inherited. Mr. Webb, I need to see documentation for these items, Officer Walsh said firmly. Marcus's story began falling apart. He claimed the items belonged to his deceased uncle, but couldn't provide a death certificate, will, or estate documentation. When pressed for the uncle's name, he gave inconsistent information. A background check revealed Marcus had prior arrests for intimidation, assault, and receiving stolen goods. This wasn't his first operation using fear tactics to move questionable merchandise. The investigation expanded when Officer Walsh discovered that Marcus had been running similar estate sales in neighboring towns. He would acquire items through theft, burglary, or purchasing stolen goods, then use intimidation tactics to sell them quickly at inflated prices. His method was effective, Detective Lisa Rodriguez explained later. He created urgency through fear. People bought items they didn't want at prices they couldn't afford because they felt threatened. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated. Marcus studied his targets, using different approaches based on their perceived vulnerabilities. He exploited elderly customers' confusion, young parents' protective instincts, and men's reluctance to appear weak. Several buyers discovered they'd purchased stolen goods. The children's bicycle had been reported stolen from a daycare center. Electronics matched serial numbers from recent burglaries. Jewelry belonged to victims of home invasions. Marcus was arrested and charged with multiple crimes: intimidation, theft, receiving stolen goods, and operating without proper business licenses. His operation had victimized dozens of people across 3 counties. The case revealed how criminals exploit the informal nature of yard sales and estate sales. People assume these events are legitimate without questioning documentation or origins of merchandise. Marcus received a 3-year prison sentence. Victims who purchased stolen goods were required to return items to rightful owners, losing their money in the process. I learned that several red flags should have been obvious: unmarked merchandise, lack of proper documentation, aggressive sales tactics, and prices that seemed too good to be true. The combination of fear and greed made people ignore warning signs. The experience changed how I approach yard sales. I now verify sellers' identities, ask for receipts on expensive items, and trust my instincts when something feels wrong. If someone uses intimidation tactics, I leave immediately. Marcus's operation succeeded because people were too intimidated to question his methods or report suspicious behavior. He exploited the social dynamics of yard sales, where buyers typically want to avoid confrontation. Have you ever felt pressured by aggressive sales tactics at yard sales or estate sales? Do you think people are too trusting when purchasing items from strangers in informal settings? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.